Hello and welcome back to this damn full idealistic crusade. This video is a review of one of the greatest cliffhanger serials ever made, the 25th Republic serial, Spy Smasher from 1942, and of all of the Republic serials that were very much the inspiration for what we see in Indiana Jones, Spy Smasher should be very much high atop that list. It's one of the key serials that inspired everything we know and love in Indiana Jones, but also is perhaps most representative of the serial form at its absolute peak. Every single element of this serial works so perfectly and so incredibly well that it remains one of the greatest serials and one of the greatest action films ever made. It is a masterpiece of the form. It should be one of the serials that everyone sees. It's on that short list of the greatest serials ever made that fans will debate on their own sort of ranking order, but that is the sort of short list of the serials that everyone should see, even if you only see a handful over time. Spy Smasher is definitely one of those. It is, again, the peak of Republic in terms of its serial production. Every single element is so perfectly realized that the serial itself seems effortless. It is perfectly paced at the traditional 12 chapters of a Republic serial and focuses on the classic Spy Smasher character from comics and even brings the main villain of The Mask over. But as always, Republic would basically take a licensed character and do whatever with it and then just basically turn that into a serial. So there are many changes and differences between Spy Smasher and The Mask as compared to the comics. Here, the character of Alan Armstrong, aka Spy Smasher, wonderfully played by Kane Richmond, and what really established him in this genre. And he would go on to a rather nice career and also appear as the lead in other Republic serials, such as Haunted Harbor. But anyway, Spy Smasher is fighting enemy agents in Europe and essentially barely eludes capture and also execution in front of a firing squad, and winds up going back to America, where he meets up with his twin brother Jack, also played by Kane Richmond, in a wonderful dual performance where each character is completely distinct and the actual usage of both characters at the same time is seamless, as it is always in a Republic serial when they would have a sort of doubling effect with the same actor playing multiple roles. He and his twin brother Jack square off against the Mask, who is the German agent and chief main arch enemy of Spy Smasher, and the Mask's various efforts to cripple the war effort and also destroy vital parts of war machinery or steal gold intended for arms or aid for other nations, and also sabotage various factories and plants and things. This, like a lot of Republic serials at the time, and really one of the last ones to do this, did a lot of extensive location footage at real life factories and facilities, which really gives these sequences much more of a grounded flavor to them, because the characters are really there and they're having these incredible fight sequences in these real locations and not a soundstage with the limited means of a smaller studio like Republic. It really adds such a degree of realism and credibility to all the sequences when Republic could actually go shoot at real facilities. We also have the characters from the comics of Admiral Corby and his daughter Eve as the sort of liaisons for Spy Smasher to continue his crusade against the Mask. And so we have the sort of idea of Spy Smasher from the comics and some of the key characters transition over into this serial, but outside of that, Republic kind of does their own thing with it. And like most serials, this might take a little bit of time to get going in terms of what a modern audience would expect. You do have the opening chapter at about 30 minutes to set up the story, and then each of the other chapters are about 20 minutes. That's how most serials are done. But Spy Smasher is a bit deceptive in that way, because while the first couple of chapters, I'd say the first 3 or so, they might be considered a little bit on the slower side, and the cliffhangers are a bit simple compared to some of the more spectacular ones to come. It is also a serial that allows its pacing to be more natural. So there are moments where the actors get time to have reaction shots and to be shown to think and to process information, and for the story to build in a natural way and to have even a feeling of the progression of the sense of time. These are some of the elements that usually are not served well by the serial form, because character development is usually not something you're going to find in a serial, because there's just no time. We have to get through all this story material and get to the cliffhanger, plus each chapter has to open with the recap of the previous chapter, so that leaves you even less time. But Spy Smasher is remarkable in the fact that we do have a sense of character development. There are significant twists and turns, and we do start to care about the characters. The villains are all so well performed that even though the mask himself is frequently not wearing his mask, which kind of ruins the idea of a mystery villain, and here is more of just a traditional Nazi villain trying to carry out war subterfuge and sabotage, and not as developed as what was in the original comic. It's so well performed and so well written in that sort of standard character of Nazi villain that it remains incredibly effective. Every element of this serial is effective. And then you look at the action. My God, the action in this serial. It is one of the greatest action films ever made. It was, of course, directed solo this time instead of being partnered, but it was solo directed by William Witney, who is without question the father of the modern action sequence and the modern action film. He is the greatest action director who ever lived and honed his craft here at Republic. And most notably, when he was partnered with John English on serials like Adventures of Captain Marvel, really made the Republic the best and most renowned of studios for serials, and really developed and pioneered the modern action sequence by having incredibly dynamic fight sequences and action, but also utilizing the camera and camera placements and editing to make everything feel unified and charged with energy, and to make the sequences as vivid and alive as possible. Whereas at that time, most people were still having the camera be quite stationary and just allowing a punch up to, destroy furniture in the room and things. And you can tell a Witney serial or a Witney action sequence from anybody just by looking at individual shots or moments without knowing who directed it. It's a William Witney serial, whether he co-directed it with somebody or he solo directed it as he did here on Spy Smasher. The action in this serial is so consistently superb that you are sitting there through all the 12 chapters and just completely blown away. It also helps that he had at his disposal some of the greatest stuntmen who ever lived, and this serial features at least 3 of them, because you have Dave Sharp and Kerry Lofton and Yakima Canutt, who is arguably the most famous stuntman of all time. And they just go for broke. Every single fight sequence, even though some people might think that serials focus too much on fistfights and they might get a bit repetitive, that is not a factor in Spy Smasher. Every fight sequence has that life or death feel to it, and just the fluidity of the action is just... no one has ever matched the fluidity of the action of a William Witney directed sequence, and Spy Smasher is just consistent. Every single action sequence, there's flips and dives across furniture and dives off staircases, and when there's a punch, guys are thrown back by the impact and thrown into walls. The gunplay is superb for the time period. There's not one facet of the action that is not just mind-blowing. Even the sequences involving aircraft and the nautical sequences on board ship and dealing with the mass submarine firing torpedoes at speeding boats and an entire mined area with underwater mines, the various trick efforts of the villain, increasing the intensity of the fight sequences, the builds to the cliffhangers, which get progressively more and more intensive in terms of their scale, which again goes back to me talking about how The start of this serial is nicely done, and we get such a nice sense of progression throughout the serial that the actual intensity builds to the final 12th chapter conclusion of the whole serial being absolutely go for broke, with a real showstopper series of explosions from the Lydecker brothers, who were the special effects gurus of Republic and basically the best special effects men in Hollywood, and showed up every studio. So this serial is peppered with some of their incredible work, which is really unmatched in the studio era. This is Republic firing on all cylinders. And there are moments in this serial that actually do attain a sense of audience emotion and engagement. There are some moments that are quite gripping. The action is breathtaking, but also because we come to care about these characters when things really do take a turn. This is a serial that does actually have character deaths. That's not something you commonly see in a serial, and if your audience isn't engaged, those are not going to have an impact. Well, they certainly do in Spy Smasher, because, again, there is not one element that is not at full level 100% of quality and energy. There are some who claim Spy Smasher as the perfect serial and arguably the best serial ever made, and I can see why now. I always knew Spy Smasher was one of the highest regarded of all serials and a major influence on Indiana Jones and everything that came after, and of course being solo directed by William Witney automatically made it a must-watch for me. But I was simply not prepared for how consistently incredible across the board every element of the production of this serial is. This is one of the greatest serials ever made. It is one of the greatest action films ever made. There would not be an Indiana Jones without Spy Smasher and the other great classic serials of Republic. And just the consistency of quality across every single level makes this serial a joy to watch. This is a serial anyone can watch. It's a serial everyone should watch. And you will realize the heart and the spirit of a classic cliffhanger serial as best evidenced and represented by the best of Republic serials, of which Spy Smasher is right there at the peak. And all the elements that are most represented by these serials directed by John English and especially William Witney. You will realize the elements that no longer exist in modern cinema, the things that have been lost. You will, of course, recognize where all of this stuff was an incredible influence on everything that followed, but never again has there been a film experience with this level of purity of storytelling as a pure adventure in every single aspect of the term, of the word adventure. That is exemplified by Spy Smasher, which is a masterpiece of the serial form. Even the chapter titles and the music are beyond striking. The music and main theme of Spy Smasher utilizes the famous Beethoven's Fifth Symphony and manages to give it such a wonderful sense of atmosphere, menace, adventure, the call to action, if you will, that signals the start of the next Spy Smasher chapter. And again, because we have a nice sense of progression, we get the importance of Spy Smasher's mission, and we even have interesting ways of getting around the traditional sort of fatigue that can happen with the serial, where you have a rather simple story with very little character development spread out over 12 or more chapters, because we have introduced the idea that our lead hero actually has a twin brother, and they keep this secret from everybody else. And so it adds a nice degree of spice to the proceedings. As if we didn't have enough of wonderful elements already, there are some unique elements here that keep the story interesting and make our characters a bit more interesting and a bit more textured than had it been a bit more straightforward, as you might see in, say, for example, the later Republic Captain America serial, which is a great serial, but it does have a good degree of that serial fatigue, and it's also 15 chapters instead of 12. So Spy Smasher is easily one of the greatest serials ever made. It's one of the serials that everyone should see. It's a film experience that any lover of action cinema especially needs to see. I personally myself still have my absolute favorite serials being Flash Gordon and Adventures of Captain Marvel. Those are always top of the heap for me, but Spy Smasher is right there. It is in the pantheon of the great serials, but I think its greatest claim to fame, the most striking notable element, aside from the fact that it is a literally perfect serial in every single aspect, the action of this serial is the level of you have to see it to believe it. It is, the pinnacle of stunt work. It is the pinnacle of effects work. It is the pinnacle of action directing. It's some of the best action I've ever seen in a film ever. It is so meticulously crafted and breathtaking that you can't believe what you're seeing. The fluidity of the action is unparalleled. It is just a marvel, and it is proof, if ever was needed, that William Witney is the greatest action director who ever lived and needs that credit and recognition. He really took the concept of a fight sequence, and his real inspiration, he always said, was he was friends with Busby Berkeley and was inspired by what Berkeley did with the iconic numbers in his classic musicals and transforming that into an art form. That's what William Witney did for the action sequence. And Spy Smasher is proof positive of that throughout all 12 chapters in some of the greatest action you will ever see in a film. And if the indie influence was not already obvious enough with Spy Smasher fighting Nazis in and around both America and in Europe, at one point, Spy Smasher in one of the early chapters picks up a bullwhip and uses it against Nazis. I mean, it's just, you can't draw the connecting line between Spy Smasher and Indiana Jones and every action film that followed. I mean, you can't draw it strongly enough. And of course, Spy Smasher is, using Indy's trademark whip at one point. This is literally one of the great film experiences. If you've never seen a serial before, Spy Smasher is a great place to start and will actually hook you on serials probably for the rest of your life, because it is a work of art. It is a masterpiece of the serial form and still remains one of the greatest action experiences in all of cinema. So, of course, it pains me to now talk about the only official major video release of the film, which is yet again another Nostalgia Merchant, very early VHS dual cassette release done in the style that they released Republic serials in. Again, like my other reviews, such as Captain America, which has a similar fate, this is from, or at least it's dated 1982. It's got nice enough artwork and in the same style as the other Nostalgia Merchant tapes. Here's the other side as well. Now, these would eventually transition over into being the official Republic Library tapes. So this rear cover of a heroine over essentially being about to be burned at the stake was used on most of the VHS releases, and eventually it would not be Nostalgia Merchant, but it would actually be Republic Pictures, and eventually they would also start doing, thankfully, some Laserdiscs of serials as well, but this is where the sort of official releases started. You also do at least have a nice label for each of the two tapes and a nice Part 1 and Part 2 side label. Of course, being a Nostalgia Merchant VHS release from 1982, the quality is very limited, and they were doing direct print transfers of whatever they could get their hands on, possibly even being 16 millimeters, so obviously you can't go into this expecting a lot of premium quality, because it's a 1982 VHS release. This also means we don't have hi-fi audio, which could be really great on tape. We are stuck with a linear mono track, and also the quality of the prints varies, so you do need to expect quite a lot of wear and damage and things to pop up, and also the quality will vary across chapters, with some being in better shape than others. But I was pleasantly surprised watching this that the overall quality was quite solid, especially for a tape release this old, coming from direct print transfers of varying quality. Some moments are definitely too dark, a lot of the nighttime sequences or some of the water sequences, so this is very much going to be a tape you have to view and will be very dependent on the quality of your VCR, and it's best to look at these on a CRT to sort of eke out the most potential potential quality out of watching a VHS release, but I did have to mess around with my settings a little bit to try and eke out the best quality possible. But overall, this is quite surprising for a 1982 tape release of raw print scans to look this good. The only major issue, besides some bits being too dark and some bits of damage, which are to be expected for a 1982 tape, most serials, of course, open with the opening credits, and then there's usually a little opening text recap, which Republic serials were famous for. Well, here, as in most old video releases and most releases of serials, those are a little bit cropped. Here on Spy Smasher, most of the credits and the opening text slides are sort of shifted to the side and thus unfortunately cropped a little, but that's something you run into with a lot of serials, unfortunately, on older releases. So overall, it's actually a decent viewing experience considering the fact that it's a VHS tape from 1982, but the fact that Spy Smasher did not see another official release ever again and still has not gotten one is insane and, quite frankly, not only ridiculous but unforgivable. This, if any serial deserved a modern scan, you should go to one of the crown jewels of the Republic library. And Republic is technically under Paramount, who has done scans for the Kino Blu-ray of Captain Marvel and Daredevils of the Red Circle. So they really need to get off their butts and actually do something with the Republic library they own, of which the serials are the most famous aspect of the Republic library, and serial preservation is very much in the toilet, as seen here, where Spy Smasher, one of the greatest serials ever made, is stuck as a not so good 1982 VHS release. But unfortunately, this is the best you can do for the serial in terms of official releases, and there are dozens and hundreds of varying crappy versions uploaded to YouTube. Most of them are going to be deriving from captures of dubious quality of this VHS tape release. So if you look at versions of Spy Smasher, it's probably stemming from somebody capturing this tape on a VCR, who knows when, and those files making their way across the internet until somebody found it and put it on YouTube. However, the Serial Squadron, the independent group who does do their own scans and restoration efforts for classic serials, has done a version of Spy Smasher. I think theirs is from 16mm. So there is a version out there now that you can look at on their disc releases, and they have samples on their YouTube channel that I'll link to. So there is an alternative option for Spy Smasher, but still, this serial cries out for a proper HD scan from original elements and a full restoration and deluxe treatment, because it is one of the great works of art of the serial form. And part of the reason why I started doing these serial reviews was to highlight the abysmal preservation of film serials and just how bad some of them are in terms of what's the only official release out there. And a good number of them are stuck as varying quality VHS tapes, including Spy Smasher and some of the most iconic legendary Republic serials, which are the best of the form. I mean, for Spy Smasher to be stuck as a 1982 VHS tape is the definition of a home video crime. This deserves a Blu-ray at least, if not a 4K scan, because it is that legendary, and it is that influential, and it is that damn amazing. It is one of the greatest action films ever made, and anyone can get that, even looking at an old 1982 VHS tape or a very low-quality YouTube upload that is apparent. Even if you've never seen a serial before in your life, you won't be able to stop until you see all 12 chapters of Spy Smasher, which is truly a work of serial art. Ultimately, I knew Spy Smasher was a great serial. I knew it had this reputation, and I knew it was directed by William Witney solo, so I knew what sort of quality to expect. But this is one of those experiences where you go into a film and you know its pedigree and you know its reputation, but you've never gotten to see it before. And then when you do, you realize you're seeing a masterpiece for the first time, and you know that you're going to be revisiting it for the rest of your life and only deepening your appreciation for it. This is a serial that enraptured kids and adults alike back in 1942. It will still do the same thing in 2024. It is a must for all adventure lovers, for all serial fans, of course, who probably already know Spy Smasher by heart, but it is also a must for indie fans and action fans most of all. This has, again, some of the greatest action you will ever see in any film ever made. It still holds up today, and it really shows Whitney's mastery of the action sequence, and he's working with some of the most legendary names in the history of stuntmanship. So, I mean, it is just firing on all cylinders. It is the peak of Republic, who was the best of all the studios producing serials. This is really what they're known for most of all in film history, besides Westerns, and it is the most iconic part of their library. Basically, serials are to Republic as classic horror films are to Universal, and so on and so forth. It is the most iconic aspect of the studio's library. And of all serials, it is the Republic serials that are in the greatest need of proper preservation, because if you're not going to properly preserve the pinnacle of the genre and art form, then what are you doing? And I think serials have really fallen by the wayside because it's viewed as an antiquated form of entertainment, and a lot of them have become quasi-public domain or entirely public domain, but are still under various studios who don't really care about them, if they even know of their existence at all, which is no way to manage a library of artistic treasures just by looking at their monetary value or name recognition. Because if you were to actually put the best of film serials out there, it would get more people interested, especially if you properly marketed them and also highlighted how they influenced every action film that came afterwards, most notably the Indiana Jones films, which were designed out of George Lucas's love for the Republic adventure serial, of which Spy Smasher is top of the list just about. So of all serials, the Republic serials need proper preservation. They need Blu-ray releases. They need new 4K masters. And, it would be astounding if they could get UHD releases. And if any Republic serial deserved that, you've got the pinnacle of Captain Marvel. But right there as well is Spy Smasher, which is one of the greatest adventure films, one of the greatest action films, one of the greatest serials, and quite frankly, one of the greatest films Republic or any Hollywood studio ever produced. It is a masterpiece and needs to be recognized as such, and it does not need to be stuck on an old 1982 VHS tape and treated as an old has-been or an artifact from a different time that no one recognizes anymore. So as always, I hope my babbles about the magic of Republic and classic cliffhanger serials and real pinnacles of the art form as seen here in the masterpiece serial Spy Smasher, and unfortunately its woeful preservation and home video status, has been at least somewhat fun and informative. I hate to recommend things that don't technically have a good, easily available version, but at least you can look at some copy of Spy Smasher online. I will leave a link to some of the sort of better looking or cleaner versions I've found, and also a link to the Serial Squadron sample version, should you choose to check out their own scan and version. But otherwise, the only official release, and what most of the online versions are copies of, remains the 1982 Nostalgia Merchant VHS release, which can be tricky to find on eBay. These don't pop up all that often, and you do usually have to pay quite a bit for them, unless you get lucky and stumble across one or two here and there in used shops. But building a complete Republic serial collection is a bit difficult because you have to mix and match between VHS, Laserdisc, DVD, and unfortunately only 2 or 3 Blu-ray releases overall. We really do need to see all 66 Republic serials properly restored and preserved, with Blu-ray releases at least, and for certain masterpieces like Spy Smasher, they really do deserve the 4K UHD treatment. So as always, please do keep supporting both studios and boutique labels by buying films on disc, especially the rare times they do a classic serial, which is mostly just the occasional Kino. Olive did 1 or 2, and the only ones really going now are the couple Universal new masters that DCI is handling. So whenever there's a serial Blu-ray, just jump all over it to show your support for that. and hopefully encourage studios and rights holders to actually do more scans and new masters of serials and to actually preserve them properly. Because by supporting work like this, you're not only ensuring that we show our support and that further work could come, but also it's helping to keep film culture and especially the whole appeal and history of the film serial alive as well. And as always, thank you ever so much for watching.